What?
I'm going to follow through and say,
Okay. So,
okay, good.
because this week has an important verse in the Parsha, then the man Moshe was more humble than any other man that was on the face of the earth. So we'll dedicate this year and maybe the next one also, depending on how much we get through, to the issue of humility in marriage. And I have to begin by saying that there's a certain perspective in which everything that we learned in rectifying the ego is really a subset of this. And I say this because in practice, it's pretty much impossible for a person to rectify his ego outside of marriage. Meaning, everything that we discussed for years, we've had a whole course for a whole year, and then it keeps coming up again and again. This whole idea of rectifying the ego really is theoretical if it's outside of marriage. Or maybe not completely theoretical, but much harder to work out. And the hint in the Parsha is that this whole verse comes out after Aaron and Miriam are talking about Moshe having left his wife. And it's almost like the Torah is saying, and in spite of the fact that he's separated from his wife, he's married. And because he's married, he's still going through this whole process. Meaning that there is, even in a state of separation, spiritually a person is aligned differently. You could say psychologically he's aligned differently, she's aligned differently. So even if they're not together in practice, physically,
Can I ask a question?
even though they're not together physically,
They can be together.
they're together spiritually, and therefore they're still going through the entire process with one another. They're still going through the process of rectifying their egos. Now, it's one of the reasons why you might say, I don't know if this was what the question was going to be, but that you might say that even in older age, okay, so even after a person becomes widowed, there is a lot to be said for, even if it's not a physical relationship, to be married.
What do you mean even after one's
We've
widowed?
mentioned that before.
The one, we did?
I'm worried about the ones who never did marry. There are some women, a lot of women here, that are not married.
No, but what do you mean about?
Not here.
Not here.
What do you
Here
mean
in Israel.
after
Here.
being widowed, you can still work on that relationship?
Because marriage is the ideal, call it a sun house or sunroom, in which your
Platform.
true character grows and can be rectified, even if it doesn't include sexual relations. That's not the epitome of it.
Then friends should be able to do it with each other.
But you said after
No,
widowhood.
because there has to be a commitment. What?
You said after widowhood, if I understood you correctly.
Yeah,
How can you still work on it after?
you got married again. Oh, you didn't understand that?
No, how are we supposed to understand that?
Oh, no, I'm sorry.
Yes,
So,
I understand.
so now we said it
I-
openly. You understand. So that's why a lot of people don't stay alone, because there's a lot to be. If it turns out that it's not, it's not good, it's making it more difficult. So I don't know. You have to think about each case separately. But in principle, that's the purpose of being married, which is a mitzvah still, even after a person cannot give birth to
If
children.
it's same sex. Hey,
There's no.
are we okay with gay marriages?
No, not at all.
Then how can this help?
Because it doesn't do anything.
So
let's
this doesn't
explain.
help.
Let's explain. These two energies, when they come together, being different and opposite, because they come together, they give birth always. Whether they give birth to something physical or not is a special case. And even when people are younger, not all the time can they have children. Either the wife is pregnant, or she's can't have, or whatever. So it's not the right time of the month, whatever it is. But what you always do give birth to, part of it we discussed last week about will, that the will increases in each. But more importantly, there's the aspect of good deeds. That really good deeds are done by a couple, together. Or, even if they're not done together physically again, that they are standing there together doing it, it's done in virtue of their being together and supporting each other. That's where real good deeds come from. And they come from this intermingling. I shouldn't feel bad. It's just that
Making us feel lonely.
lonely is not. It's not about being lonely.
Yeah, I know.
Because, like you said, you can be with a good friend and not be lonely. But it's not the same thing as couplehood.
Empty. There's an emptiness without real marriage.
The companionship has to be such that there's a bond, there's a commitment to one another, and more importantly, there's a commitment to Torah, to Hashem. And when there's that commitment to Hashem, then the couple can produce good deeds together. Okay, so just again to recap where we started from, that in this week's parsha it says that Moshe was more humble than any man on the face of the earth. And this humility is discussed, we said, almost as a response to what Aaron and Miriam were saying, that he's separated from his wife. And yet, the Torah comes and says he's more humble than anybody, even though he's separated. He's not divorced, but he's separated. Separated means that of course he would talk to her, but they wouldn't have any relations. That's all it means. Now, you can also say, what do you want? He's also 80-something years old.
Yeah, but they also
So
have
it's not
baby,
like
90, so...
So maybe he can, maybe he can't. But he's in a different stage now, so they're still together, but there's a separation. There's a certain separation of the physical level. So humility, in the sense that we talked about rectifying the ego, is really the title that goes over rectifying the ego. Meaning, when you look into the Torah and you ask, where in the Torah do we talk about lowliness, shiflut, and where in the Torah do we talk about bittul? Where do we talk about this? So nowhere are these words mentioned in the Torah, in the Chumash. In Sefer Shmuel we have this word, but the word bittul.
Synonyms. They don't use any.
So the closest synonym is anava, is humility.
Anava is humility.
And in that sense, this becomes the title of everything that we really learned all the years between selflessness and lowliness, and those two things being what balance and create a rectified individual. They curb the ego. They are really embodied and epitomized in Moshe Rabbeinu and in his anava. And actually, again, when you learn Chassidus, you see this word bittul a lot, and it's an important word, but it's not a word from the Torah, and it's a later construct. And so, really, what we call bittul, how is it said in the Torah? V'nachnu ma, and we're nothing. And that Moshe says about him and Aaron, we're nothing. That's how the bittul comes out there. But the general context where it does say it explicitly, and that's how everything comes out, is in terms of the humility, and specifically, again, as a reaction that the Torah gives to Aaron and Miriam, saying that because he's separated, physically separated from his wife, he's no longer the man he used to be, meaning he's not, and yet the Torah says, no, he is. Not only is he's attained, even in his current state, the highest level of humility. So really, this is like just an introduction to why we're going to talk about humility today, and what humility means in marriage, and what does it mean to be humble. So the simplest thing is to say that it just means lowliness. Okay? It's just what it is.
That's the action of it.
Sorry?
It's the action of it, it's not what it is.
Okay, so everything we talked about loneliness, about shiflut, is really how humility comes out. But there's a lot of forms of humility. Actually, if you remember, we once talked about this, that like everything, when you learn it through the pnimius of the Torah, you learn from the inner teachings of the Torah, everything becomes a partzuf, everything becomes a model. So humility really is composed of 4 separate aspects, each one being a different embodiment of what it means to be humble. And the lowest one is lowliness. And lowliness is, again, seeing how things aren't so good with me. It's being able to admit to myself my shortcomings. And because of that, really I have no cause for expecting anything.
Nobody should expect anything.
Right?
Anyway.
I'm not entitled to anything.
No.
These are harsh words for somebody who's heard them the first time. You know this, because most people, when they hear this, you're not entitled to anything, so what do they say? That reflects on me that I'm a terrible person. Because they immediately associate it with their poor self-image, with their lack of confidence. But really, the only part of me that can say I have shortcomings is the part of me that's standing completely before God and is loved by God. If I don't feel that, I can't say this in a productive way to myself, in a constructive way. Then I'll say to myself, I have shortcomings, and I'm not entitled because of that to anything, and the only thing it'll do to me is it'll put me down. So certainly this can only be said, like we've talked endless times, when a person fully understands and feels that Hashem cares for him and loves him and wants him to be successful. And yet I have shortcomings. I've done things that are wrong in my life. Therefore, I cannot expect anything as if I'm entitled to it. Certainly good things will happen, but not because I'm entitled to them. I can't take it as a given that they have to happen. Okay, so that's the level of lowliness and humility. There's another form of humility which is completely different. It's humility before a higher power. Okay? And in marriage, this is the humility before the Torah. It's not even humility before Hashem.
What is your word for it?
Hachna. It's just called hachna. Not to be confused. I mean, you translate it as submission, but it's not the general submission that we talk about necessarily. It could be, but it's not necessarily. What does it mean to be submissive before the Torah? It means that a home can only function properly and be constructive to rectifying the couple's egos if they're both subservient to a higher power, to the Torah. Meaning, if there's a feeling that, we can make it up as we go along, the humility is not functioning there, then it's also going to spill over into our relationship with each other. We have to both feel that we're humble before Hashem.
But Torah, you're saying, no?
Specifically, to say I'm humble before Hashem is sort of like what Navi said yesterday, Jews who say, but I'm a good Jew. So to say I'm humble before Hashem, in the end, it almost means nothing. It has to be I'm humble before the Torah. What do I mean I'm humble before the Torah? I'm humble before the halacha. I'm humble also, for instance, in talking about the figures in the Torah. Again, this is for me, not for them. The distance between me and them is between me and the persona described in the Torah, between me and Moshe Rabbeinu, between me and Aaron, between me and anybody who's mentioned there, even between me and Noach, is for me. That humility serves me, not them. They don't need it anymore. They don't care if I say this or that about them. But I care. Meaning, is there something that I'm subservient to? Is there something that both husband and wife feel that is above them, that they have to answer to? Let's say it that way.
Like having the same vision. Sharing the same vision.
And that's, instead of vision, I would say value. That they share the same values. What are these values? It's one of these things that the rest of the world has a difficult time with, because For instance, when you're talking about how does a wife see maybe her husband's occasional, let's call it, foray into negative places on the internet? Okay? How does she see it? So it depends. If it's like, I'll do whatever I want, and that's the general feeling in a marriage that doesn't have the Torah over it, then we're not. You're mocking me. Then it becomes. It's not just that you're not humble before the Torah. You're also you're mocking our relationship. But if it's because I make mistakes. A person makes mistakes.
Wow.
So then the wife also makes mistakes. She also knows she makes mistakes. So is it good? Of course it's not good. But is it the end of the story? It depends. Again, if the person feels that it's wrong. That what I'm doing is wrong. Same thing with, I don't know, think of anything you want.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That we're together on this. We're together on this thing. We're subservient together to halacha.
Can I mention something? I have a friend. The husband is very difficult. I mean, I've never heard his side of the story, always her side. So once she says she works hard, she has 10 children around, most of them married. So she comes home, she likes to watch a film on the internet. So her husband came and said, how can you do such a thing? And I'm sure it wasn't a film to relax. She says to him, it's between me and Hashem.
Okay.
I need this to relax.
Well, she shouldn't say it that way, right? She needs to refrain
So,
that.
you
For
can
some
decide
time.
together how you're both going to stand together before Hashem, before the Torah. You have to decide together. You have to make the limits clear.
Together, it's a difficult couple.
Those
It's
are
a
the
difficult
rules.
marriage.
That's why the marriage is difficult. It's the other way around. It's not that it's a difficult, in my opinion, it's not that they're difficult to each other because they're difficult to each other. It's because the humility, at least in this respect, is lacking. Because both of theirs, because they haven't joined at some level to have a common expectation of what our level of commitment to Allah is. Where do we stand? It has to be discussed. It has to be agreed upon. To say that in the end each one lives his own life, that you can only say if there's a married couple and one of them decides to become a Baal Tshuva. So now you have to navigate somehow, because you don't want to settle. Eventually they'll come to a common ground. But when people marry from, there's no reason in the world why it should suddenly, unless again that's what's causing the rift, they should suddenly stand in different places relative to halacha. If there's a common ground here, that we're both humble before Hashem, in this case it manifests as humble before the Torah, then there's good common ground for the marriage.
What's his response?
A big dispute, a big shouting,
big dispute.
You've got ego against ego.
Okay, that's what it turns into. In the end, that's what it turns into. Because when you say it's between me and Hashem, what are you saying? This is what my ego needs, and you can do whatever you want. And that's not a basis for humility. Okay? Humility says, really, in the end, humility is. You have to understand this. In the end, and this is almost impossible to counter. I've never heard of one that I could live with, anyway. The level of a person's observance is a product of their humility. It's simply that way. The more ego a person has, the more difficult it becomes for them to do what Torah says. It becomes an issue, because then it's really, when you're saying it's between me and God, it's not really between me and God. It's between my ego and the perceived ego that Hashem has. But Hashem doesn't have an ego. It's not like He's going to strike you down because you didn't do what He said. He's going to wait for you until you decide to do something. Until you do something with yourself. Okay? He keeps waiting and waiting and waiting. But in the end, that's a second form of humility. Okay? The third form of humility is how Moshe Rabbeinu's humility is explained in Chassidus. What does it mean literally when we say that he was humble more than any person on the face of the earth? And the idea of being more humble than somebody else. It's already it takes into consideration the fact that there's other people here. It's a humility that is measured relative to others. I know you would say, what kind of humility is that? If I'm comparing, so maybe it's not humility at all. So in Chassidus it's explained that what it means that he was more humble than any other person was that he realized that since he had no expectations, right? That's from the lowliness. He has no expectations, no entitlement. So anything that he has is a gift from above. There's a few sichas from the Rebbe about humility, and the second one, which is in part 13, he mentions he quotes, he doesn't quote, he cites the Gemara in the Durham that says that even the Torah was given to Moshe Rabbeinu as a present. And what's the description? That Hashem tried to teach it to him, and he couldn't remember all of it. It's too much. 40 days and 40 nights, not enough time. Why was it? It's almost like, why was he there for so long? It's a little bit of a different narrative. Because he didn't get it the first time. So Hashem tried again. In the Gemara it says it was just once. Like it took 40 days and 40 nights, and then when Hashem saw that he couldn't get it all, so he gave it to him a present. But in the Medrash, where the imagination is more
What do you mean
wider, he couldn't.
What was it?
It's
first?
impossible. He tried with his faculties to completely understand the Torah, and he failed. He couldn't. It's
and
too much.
Could, it wouldn't have been a gift anymore.
Then it wouldn't have been a gift. It would have been his toil, his work. Okay? So, in the Medrash, it's even further. The Medrash says he tried a few times. So maybe that, according to the Medrash, is why it took so long, because he tried and he tried. Eventually, Hashem had no choice but to give it to him as a present. And the Medrash uses a beautiful image, which again relates it to marriage. And it says it's in the same way that a groom receives his bride. What does the Medrash want to say? Or vice versa. Meaning that you did nothing to raise this person. Meaning you received them after their parents took care of them from the day they were born until now. And you received them fully formed, fully built, an adult. Okay?
That's in the beginning. After many years, you can claim some.
Settle. But that's how you receive it. That's what you have to remember all the time, that it's a gift. That you were not entitled to this. It's a gift. The concept, by the way, of Beshert is many times very, very detrimental to understanding this. Because people have this picture, well, it had to be this way. Nothing has to be that way. Beshert just means that there is a natural inclination for something to work. But you can ruin it. And most of all, it doesn't entitle you to it. It just says that this is where it'll work well. But nobody says that you have to actually meet your Beshert. Nobody says you have to actually... in other words, what if you meet your Beshert when she's a year old? Are you going to raise her? No. It's not going to happen. So the understanding that I'm not entitled by nature to this is a key element in humility. So what we said about expectations, I don't have any expectations. Hashem doesn't have to give me my wife. And the wife says he didn't have to give me my husband. And who do I owe the thanks to? To the parents who raised them. So in the end I receive a gift. Because if it would have been up to me, I wouldn't have been able to raise them. By the way, it's not stam, this statement. Because originally the intent was like by Cain and Hevel, that they married their sisters. They were born, the natural state of affairs, as it were, before Adam and Eve ate from the tree of knowledge, was that a person would be born with their spouse. They would be twins. And then you would have this element of having to raise the person you're going to marry. You would grow up together. And by the way, it's a very interesting thing. I guess that's why, one of the reasons at least, why the Torah says that the highest form of marriage is between, the Rav mentioned this on Sunday, between an uncle and a niece.
They were born
And
before the
from
Chet?
the sister.
Specifically from his sister.
And do you know if that's true for my husband? We heard that last night. And it was so true.
What do you mean?
His parents had such a love affair their
Mhm.
whole life.
And they were
Such
brother,
a
they were
role model.
They were
niece
uncle
and
and niece.
Uh-huh.
No way.
Why? Because it's the closest form of raising a daughter, who's like a sister. She's a daughter, but she's also like a sister. It's like your sister's daughter. So it's the closest. You have the most in common, but even more than that, you contribute to it the most.
Where's that from?
It's not so uncommon. It's,
Really? There
in
are a lot
in
of
earlier
Jewish
generations, it was very
Not
common.
now.
I think in non-Jewish law it's not allowed.
We heard that.
In non-Jewish law,
No,
it's
you're
not
not allowed to
allowed.
marry your aunt. The other way.
The other way you can't, but not the uncle and the niece.
Where's
So-
it from? What's the source for
No,
this?
no.
Gemara says this.
Gomorrah says, no, I don't mean an uncle. I mean that you were supposed to be born a twin before the sin.
That was how Cain and Hava were. It says et Cain, et achiv, et hevel. We learned this there. Every time it says, but they
An
had,
aunt cannot marry a nephew.
Cain had a twin with him, and Hevel had two twins, meaning they were triplet.
I don't get it.
So it's from the word et. Every time it says et is an unnecessary word in Hebrew. I forgot to mention this yesterday.
Yeah, he
but,
did mention it.
I love mentioning it
Oh
though.
wait, you
It's
weren't
such a
there.
funny thing
You weren't at
that
his lecture.
Ben Gurion he hated the word et.
Et?
He couldn't stand it, so he never said it. So listen to the way he speaks and he writes. It's funny. It's really funny how he speaks. He won't use the word et.
For
So it
reasons
said-
that we explained yesterday.
Because it's unnecessary. What do you need it for?
Oh, yes.
What's it for? He couldn't get it.
You must have watched Rob Ginsburg's lecture.
I was there. What do you mean? You must have watched.
I didn't see that.
Okay. Anyway,
Sorry, they were born before the Chet?
so they were born, all of them, before they ate from the tree of knowledge. So that was the original state of affairs.
Wait a minute.
It's even more than that.
People were born before they ate.
Okay, that's
could
that's
that
how the Gemara says it was the messianic state where horav yoledet yochdav, that the woman becomes pregnant and gives birth at the same moment.
It's not 9 months.
It's not 9 months, it's 9 minutes. It's within the same hour. It's all within the same hour. If you want an idea of it, you have to watch Aliens. Something like that. There it looks to us like it's some kind of freaky thing, but there's no reason why it can't happen. It just depends on how fast the whole process goes. It's not time, it's like the process in the body. The body that's really alive, that's very vigorous, has a lot of life to it, can do it in 9 minutes. But a body that's not, like our bodies, so they're very weak, so everything takes a long
You
time.
mean before it comes down into reality?
Anyway, now we're getting into
No, it's important.
but the thing to know is that there's a pasuk that says in the Torah, "Vayam buchelim mishpechotav," that the people were crying for their families. What were they crying about? So Rashi says on place that they were just taught the laws of arayot, of the types of marriage that are not allowed. What was the thing they were crying about the most? A marriage of a brother to a sister. Why? We talked about this once. Because if you want to retain wealth in a family, you can't do it anymore. Because now brothers and sisters can't get married. They have to marry off to a different family. So then the wealth is
You give it
divided.
to the head, to the
That works on your
husband.
humility more.
What? Settle? Okay. It works more in your ability.
You just
In any case, so let's get back to the topic.
7 years younger than my brother. I was in love with
So,
That's great.
okay, so now,
There you go.
So humility by Moshe Rabbeinu is feeling, first of all, I'm not entitled to anything. And then, by the way, Avraham, the first example of love in the world is between Avram and Sarah. And she's his niece. So that's the main,
Right.
that's the first example, the strongest example of
Sarah's his
everything.
niece.
Amazing. Oh, yeah.
Just what's
And Rivka was also born from the same type of marriage. That Nachol and Milcah were also uncle. Nachol was Avram's brother, and Milcah was Sarah's sister.
Rivka
So it was also, and Rivka was their daughter. So Yitzchak and Rivka are the product of two marriages like this, of an uncle with a niece. Okay. In any case, let's get back to the.
But Yitzhak wasn't Rivka's uncle.
No, but they're the product of two such marriages. They're cousins. They're cousins, and they're even second cousin. There's both cousins and second cousins.
Mordechai and Esther, maybe also. No?
Mordechai and Esther was also,
Yeah.
right? Another example. He was her uncle. Okay. So now getting back to Moshe's humility. It says that Moshe is more humble than any person on the face of the earth. So in Chassidus it's explained, what does it mean that he's more humble? Because he's not entitled to anything. He looks at his good traits. He sees them. And he acknowledges that since he wasn't entitled to them, everything he received as a gift. Right? We got to this because we told the Gemara and the Medrash about that the Torah even was given to him as a gift. So, since it's a gift from God, he has no course for feeling superior to anybody else. And what does it mean that he's more humble than any other person on the face of the earth? And he says to himself, he says the following logic. He says, if Hashem would have given the same gifts, the same character traits, the same
Yeah, but he didn't. So
things
still feel-
to somebody else, he not only would have he attained my level, my stature, he would have attained a higher stature. Okay? So that's humility. Humility is to say, it's based on the lowliness, on the first level that we talked about, but it's to say that if whatever I have that's good was given to somebody else, they would do more with it than I can. Now, that logic doesn't ring well with everybody.
No, it doesn't.
Why?
It's in the second.
Because you need the highest level of humility. And this is already a mimer from the Rashav, from the fifth Rebbe. In one of his mimerim, he explains that the reason that this reasoning worked for Moshe Rabbeinu, to think that if Hashem would have given the same qualities to somebody else, they would do more with them. The reason that it rang true to him was because Moshe has humility in his essence. What is humility in your essence?
Is that number 4?
That's the highest form of humility. It's essential humility. And here the humility is not before somebody else, but rather that I'm completely nullified before God. If a person isn't completely nullified before God, he won't be able to get this reasoning. Like, there'll be something that doesn't work. So this is like the higher level of the subservience that we talked about before. Before we talked about subservience before the Torah. Here it's subservience directly before God. This one I don't want to get into so much because it's less relevant to us. Because either you're born with it or not, basically. Either you're a tzaddik or you're not. So that needs some more discussion to make it relevant. We'll make it relevant, but not today. We'll make it relevant in terms of how people conduct themselves at home in a different class. Okay? Because there is a practical manifestation to all four levels, and even the fourth one has something practical that you can do with it. Okay, but now let's see where this takes us. Okay. Yes.
You started about Moshe Rabbeinu saying that the humility is measured relative to others, and you finished saying it's humility before Hashem.
Right.
So in essence, like, is it more between the man and Hashem, or between the person, the man, and others?
No, the third level is between a person and others. The fourth, the highest, is between a person and Hashem.
Even Torah.
That was the fourth. The
Yes.
fourth is the essential humility. That it's almost like either you're born with it or not, and that's what Moshe Rabbeinu meant when he said "V'nachnu ma," that we're nothing. Really, the nothingness was a humility before Hashem. That's what, in the end, what it's called. Okay.
But you have to be born with it. Not that many people are born with
Okay,
it.
or you become a tzaddik.
Born with it,
No, you can't because that's
because it's not your essence.
when it's essential, you can't feel.
It would be nice that your second nature is your essence. Wouldn't that be
Okay,
cool?
now let's see something that this relates to. And we'll talk about one particular thing today, hopefully. Praise versus criticism at home. Okay? The idea that underlies this whole discussion of how to talk to one another is that there has to be love behind all speech. That all speech has to come out of a form of loving kindness, chesed. But the chesed in each form of speech takes on a different role. So let's just go through you probably heard this. This I imagine that you did hear from Rebbetzin Kitov, I hope. In any case, 5 forms of speech at home. And
this is only at home.
you could say that there's also some levels of this appear in other circumstances. But really the full manifestation of how to speak is only at home. Meaning, the way I used to say it in short is there's nobody else who's willing to tolerate you, okay, fully. So in the relationship that happens in marriage, all levels of speech come out. Whereas with people that you only work with, or even your children, not all forms of speech will come out.
And
Okay.
they don't really tolerate it, they hate it.
So the question is how you do it. Okay. So the first is how to speak with love. So basically chesed, in Kabbalah, chesed goes, there's 5 chesedim, 5 forms of chesed, of loving kindness, and they go from chesed to hod, from loving kindness, might, beauty, victory, and acknowledgement. The 5 sfirot from chesed to hod. So each one of the forms of loving kindness informs one of these sfirot.
Informs
Okay,
one of
It gives its soul.
It's like
It's the inter-inclusion in it, but it means it gives that sphira its soul. Okay, and these are the forms of speech. So there's a form of speech called love. There's love and closeness, and being close. So you would think that when you talk about love, or when you talk lovingly, loving kindness is in there anyway. But it's not that simple. Meaning there's the shell, there's the form of speech, and there's the soul behind it. And even when you talk words that are words of love and closeness, there still has to be loving kindness in those words. And we'll see in a moment what... actually, we won't see it today. We're not going to talk about it today.
Removing yourself from it?
We'll see. We'll see when we get to it. So that's another point.
The form of speech is the shell, and then
Right.
what's behind
The style of speech, call it. Okay?
the style of speech, and then
And loving kindness has to be its soul.
oh, okay.
Has to be the meaning behind it, the motivation behind it. Okay.
wait, you start with, go through all 5, but it's love within all 5 of these.
Right.
All 5 of these within love.
No,
Or it's-
the love within all 5 of these, the loving kindness. Then there's the might, the speech that's mighty, and that's easy to recognize. That's criticism.
Oy.
What we call in Hebrew tochecha. And if you say oy, it means that you've never been criticized with love. Why? Because everybody's afraid of it. How can you criticize? Because if you criticize, it's the end of the world. Why? Because most people, like Rabbi Akiva says, "Mesupkani im yesh mishi yodeh leochiach b'dor hazeh." I'm in doubt whether anybody in his generation You could say, well, it's not so surprising because in his generation, 24,000 students died because they didn't know how to talk to each other. But in any case, even in our generation, it's also true. Do people know how to criticize in a way that it can both be heard, but more importantly, actually be, and that you feel that it comes out of love? Right? The simple remez, like the allusion in the word tochecha in Hebrew, this you probably remember, is toch. How do you write tochecha? Taf vav chaf chet hey. Taf vav chaf just means toch, inside, and the chet hey together equals ahava. So really, tochecha is a beautiful word that alludes constantly to the fact that the inside has to be love. So let's say the simplest thing about tochecha before we get into other things is
That's beautiful.
that in order to, why is there an order here? Because you heard that, you heard it 100 times.
No, we didn't.
I said it here at least 3 times.
When do you?
Anyway, said it.
Okay, you have beginner's mind.
Yeah, you've got a lot. You've got a
Heard for
mind
the
that's
first time.
Anyway, what does it mean? It means the way I ideally see it every time I read this again, and you can read it in Mystery of Marriage, which was the
that's
Book of the Month Club.
Is it in there? Is that
Yeah,
broke down
it's a
into-
chapter called Words of Love and Kindness. So, what does it mean? It means that before I can say anything that's critical, I have to say a lot of love.
To say it's for your good.
No, you
that's
have
not
to
love.
Say nice things first.
That's the criticism. What does love mean? Love means that I have to be completely convinced, a million percent, that you love me. That you're not saying this because you're angry at me, but because you love me. How do I express love? It's not that easy. In fact, I said every time I read this, ideally I think about what it would look like. And by the way, this is especially true about women to their husbands. It's less true, and we'll see why later, between the husband and the wife, that you have to be able to say so much love that in the end you forget about the criticism. If you can't, if that's not even an option, meaning if you didn't forget a little and then you have to remind yourself, so what did I want to say? Then it's not there yet. Because what does it mean that I love you? That I love you anyway. If it's criticism in the sense that you're stepping on me, that's not criticism. That's not criticism at all. That's something else entirely. What is that? You're stepping on me. Criticism has to be tochecha, means that I expect and I hope that I can help you. Not that I can help me. I can't say criticism to you in the hopes of helping myself. That's not criticism. That's not tochecha. That's saying, and you're allowed to say that, but those are not words of love. They're something else. Certainly not words of criticism. To say, I'm hurt by this. You can say that. I'm hurt by it. Also after a lot of words of love. But that's not criticism. I'm not telling you what's wrong. You figure it out. I don't know why. But that hurts me or something like that. Really, if I have a lot of love for the person, and this is what makes marriage a Garden of Eden, is that in the end, my humility says, forget it. It's not even important. Because I have so many shortcomings, I can't expect anything for myself in that sense. Nobody owes me. I can share my feelings. That's okay. But the feelings can't be, well, it should have been different. No, it's just a matter of fact that, maybe you can help me feel better about what happened. Maybe I shouldn't have been hurt by it. Why? Because I'm certain that you didn't mean to do anything wrong. The marriage becomes a Garden of Eden only, and the mamish becomes paradise, if both the husband and the wife constantly feel that, of course, the other side never wants to hurt me. And if they did, it was by mistake. And it's just like I did in Avera, same thing. In the same way that I don't want Hashem to look at me and say, what a terrible person, because it's not true. I didn't do the Avera because I'm a bad person. I did it because it was a mistake. I didn't mean to do it in order to hurt the world. I didn't mean to do it in order to hurt my life, or certainly not. That has to be the underlying feeling. And if it's not, then you have to work on it to get there. That of course, even when I do something wrong, it's not to hurt you. And, okay, anyway, but criticism is really when there is something wrong. It's not, I know the person doesn't want to hurt me, but there's something wrong, and I want him to fix it. Why do I want him to fix it? Not because it hurts me, because I'm not hurt, because I know that he doesn't mean it. But rather for him. If it's for them, that's what criticism really means. It's for them. There's a lot of confusion that I'm not going to get into now. But there's a lot of confusion that breeds a lot of anger in the world about what it means that we're arevim ze lazeh, that we're mutually responsible for one another. People see it as, if some Jew does something wrong, I'll suffer for it. That's not what it means at all. And it's just a common mistake. It's a common mistake. There's so many people. What does it mean? It means that if I could have done something about either preventing it or helping them see it differently, if I could have done something and I refrained from doing it, then I suffer for what they did. But otherwise, I don't suffer for something that somebody else did. There's no such thing. I suffer for what my parents did.
In the good, it does work, though. No, in the positive.
And the positive, we're all happy to share.
Someone
Yeah.
it's a better kosher, and
It's a better kosher. I don't know if that's, somebody gives tzedakah, it affects everybody. It affects everybody. It does a goodness. But arvut, mutual responsibility, is exactly that, responsibility. You cannot sit and watch somebody fall in front of a train and do nothing. If you could have done something, what if you're watching it through, I don't know, a screen?
But if you're not doing it with love, you're not helping. It's going to not help.
So here, exactly that if my spouse is doing something wrong, I have to, and there is something that I can do about it. Of course there's something. I'm the only one maybe that can do something about it. The only way to do something about it is to give criticism that's based on love. Because in the end, what do I want? I want you to have a better life. I want you to have a better existence. Of course, it will also affect me. But that's not the reason I'm doing it. I'm doing it because of you. So in the Torah, this is described in Mishlei. Shlomo HaMelech, he calls this Tochecha Megula, open criticism or explicit criticism, Me'ahava Mesuteret, has to come from implicit love. But the implicit love has to be felt. It's true that the words are critical, but it has to Mesuteret. Now, since I thought about this today before the class, that since we're really big on the pnimius of the Torah, the nister of the Torah, so the nister today is open. Nistal. Nistal is like the concealed. So even though the love is concealed, today nobody wants it to be concealed. All the concealed is revealed today. So it has to be revealed. To the point where you can forget that you even wanted to say something nigla.
So implicit is not good anymore. You
have to make it very explicit.
Open criticism. So there should be a new term for.
And it's even called in Hebrew. The idiom came from Hebrew. I'm almost certain, but in English it has a negative connotation. So I'll change it a little. I'll tell you the negative connotation is sweet talking somebody. In Hebrew, the word is sweet lipping somebody, metek svatayim. Metek Svatayim is like sweet lips. But it means, it's like Dvash v'chalav tachat leshonecha. That it's said with sweetness. It has to be sweetness. Can. I said in English, sweet talking somebody has a negative connotation. You're fooling them, or you're brown nosing, whatever you're doing. Right.
So this
But in Hebrew, the word is very positive. It's called metek svatayim.
But open criticism is from where?
It has to come from
No.
concealed love.
That term. Who said open criticism?
Shlomo Melech in Mishlei, in Proverbs,
And
says open criticism from concealed love. Has to come from concealed love.
has to come from implicit love.
I called it implicit. It's like concealed. Same thing. Implicit,
Shem does
concealed.
with us.
תוכחה מגולה מאהבה מסותרת. Okay.
I think I witnessed this once in my life, and everything changed, like in a second. I mean, I'll just share a little bit. We were on vacation with my biological family. There was a famous fight. My sister was upset with my mother. The dog food, like it was like one of these things. And my dad, who was like very old, and in his tzidkus that we didn't see for 90 years, like he was in an amazing place. And at that moment, very lucid, and he held cup with it, and he got all the facts in such a sweet way. And my sister was so angry, so offensive and defensive. And he said to her, from a place of total love, he said, it's so interesting. It was where he came from inside of himself, and then he said to her, boy, Ellie, honey, you've got a lot to learn. And my sister started to cry. It was just, I mean, it was.
So he said he didn't have to say even words of love. It was just how he said it.
It was where he came from.
Wisdom.
It came true. My father it wasn't really his personality his whole life, but he was really in this place
Came
of
from
love.
God.
And then the words that he chose really.
I guess it didn't matter because the moment that it came from.
She got it. Everybody got it.
So,
If he would have said that as a 50-year-old, it probably would have meant the same. But it wouldn't have even sounded the same. It would have come off saying, dumb.
I think people sense the truth.
if anybody has problem with sound, so just write because I don't know if it's coming across. That was for the Facebook viewers.
What was?
Because somebody wrote that there was a problem with the sound, so I'm
My
wondering.
voice comes across in the face.
Yeah, they all do.
They all do.
Didn't you see it yesterday?
Yeah. Okay. So let's
There was a
continue.
problem yesterday or stop
Okay.
recording?
The third type, and here we have the one that's the most problematic in day to day because it's sort of overlooked, and when it's not overlooked, it's not done out of loving kindness.
Wait, what were the first three?
First two, we said.
Heseds, but this is the third.
Love and criticism, and now we have praise.
Praise.
Praise and admiration. And here, the problem with praise and admiration is that they're usually taken for granted, that you don't have to say anything.
Don't mention the word respect.
No, not here. Anyway.
That is a good one.
Now, why does it become taken for granted or even dormant or, well, not used? Is because people have an overwhelming sense that to praise somebody is exactly that, to
Build their ego.
fill their ego. And it's empty. That when I praise somebody, I praise them to get something. And so, I don't say it. I don't give praise. Because either I'm feeding their ego, which is the negative, really the most negative possibility, or I'm doing it to get something in return. And there's this overwhelming bad rap that praise gets. But in marriage, that's not right. That might be right about somebody on the outside. That's not the state of affairs in marriage. If there's anywhere that praise,
Nothing should be taken for granted.
nothing should be taken for granted, and the praise is not about getting something. It's on the contrary, it's completely the opposite. Again, let me explain what the idea here is. When we say the loving kindness goes into each one of these forms of speech, what are we saying? That how do you say this in a parable? That if you want something to grow, you have to water it. If you want a person to grow, you have to give them loving kindness. You have to give them love. Love is water. Water is compared to love. Fire is compared to might. So what it means here is that I'm giving the praise in order to get the person to grow, in order to give them the sustenance that they need in order to grow. This is different than with children even, where the praise might fill the ego in the wrong way. But even with children, if it's filled with loving kindness, with a feeling that I want you to grow, so that's what they'll get out of it. It won't be so much to praise. And also I have my trick, which is, again, not to praise the product, but to praise the action. Yes. So all that stuff. But between a couple, that doesn't exist at all. There has to be open praise. Speaking openly about the good qualities. And the good acts. And the good and this is the thing that, what can I tell you? Every single time I hear this, my heart breaks. I don't know why. I have something special with this. I don't know why. That women are not praised for how they look. I never understand. By their husbands. What is that? I can't understand that.
Even in the younger generation?
Maybe especially.
Because the men are holding them up to a higher standard.
I don't know why. So there's always somebody more beautiful. Who cares? I'm not praising you as... This is not a beauty contest. It's... maybe it comes with age. I don't know exactly what. But you get to a...
feel that they cannot do that? Does it take away from them?
He feels like he's not telling the truth.
Maybe he's not telling the truth because he's comparing, or I don't know what. But it's like an inability to see what's in front of you. And to see just that. Forget about what... Because I think that that's exactly what the woman wants to hear. And she's also not an idiot. She knows how she compares to others. It's not the point. The point is that you see me for who I am. And so not to praise physical appearance, not to praise dress, or you say how modest she is, or whatever it is about the appearance, is not to see her. So this really goes more from, say it like this, that if criticism is more from the woman to the man, then praise is more from the man to the woman. It's the men that can hear a criticism more, and women not so much. And they need it, meaning the men need, this was even the Hayom Yom today, I think. Hayom Yom today is that the Rebbe Rashab says, invite and love criticism because it will put you in your rightful place. It says when a man reaches his true potential, his true stature, he invites, he says, tell me what's wrong. What's wrong with what I'm doing? Tell me. You think about a person who is a good CEO, right? Who's not there to be, right? A poor CEO is somebody who can't take any advice from anybody else. Certainly can't take criticism. A good CEO is somebody that hears all the criticism and says, what do I need to fix here? Maybe half the stuff that's being told is wrong. Okay, it's wrong. But not to be able to hear it, not to be able to invite it, not to be able to think about it. right? That means you're not living up to your potential. So for a man, this is really important, the criticism that he hears from his wife. If he was smart, that's
Right.
he'd listen to it. If she was smart, she would, right, most of the time finish with "I just love you" and not remember what you wanted to say. But so after all that, in the end, the criticism is more for the man, but the praise is more for the woman.
Can I say something? I want to give a story, a little story. I mean,
The men will do.
something I'm really proud of, that my husband and I used to tell people that we were each other's mutual admiration society. So it would be nice to be able to have somebody say that about your marriage, your relationship. That must mean something's working. And it showed on the outside, I think. We were always seen as a very loving, interactive couple with whatever we do.
Right? So everybody should merit that. But of course, so let's give there's three categories basically of praise that you could build it otherwise, but we always like to build things based on here. It's because we said it's mostly from the man to the woman, so it has to do praise.
What's wrong with the praise from the woman to the man?
Nothing.
It can be more damaging.
No, she can also say, but it's not the main part of praise in the marriage. It's more the criticism. Remember, like we said in joking, that in short, it's he makes her happy and she puts him down, right? So he makes her happy is the praise, mostly the praise, and she puts him down is the criticism, if done properly in the right way. And it's only two of them. The mutual love has to be, words of love have to be words of love. They have to be equal. And the two other forms that we'll see, they also have to be equal. We'll get to them in a moment. But now, in terms of praise, because I said it's mostly from the man to the woman, so there are three things that a man is obligated to provide his wife with. Right? So it's called she'era, ksuta, v'onata. She'era is, we learn, like she'er basar is food.
Right, in this case.
Ksut, there's different opinions between Rashi and Ibn Ezra. I'm not going to get into all of them. It's just in pshat. Ksut is clothing. That he's responsible for clothing. Ksut. Okay. And onata is their relations, the physical relations. That he has to give. If she wants. If she doesn't want it, something else.
Is this all in the ketubah?
And we don't exactly write it in the Ketubah because this is from the Torah. This is the Oraita. The Ketubah is the Rabbanan. It's additional requirements that a man is obligated towards his wife, and they're mostly monetary. These are not monetary obligations, although they could translate into something monetary. They're first of all a physical obligation.
So shelter's not monetary?
Ksut would be together, like clothing and shelter would probably go together. Okay, so how do they work out today in terms of praise? So I owe you this. So I owe you praise in terms of food. Right? That's what Rabbi Akiva says, that if he feels that she ruined his dish, so they should get divorced. What do you mean? Because if he says it, Rabbi Akiva, who had such a good relationship with his wife, you can understand how somebody could ever feel that the dish was ruined, right? She burnt the food or whatever it is. It's always good. In fact, it's a condition. It's physical. We know today it's a physical condition of certain people that you like burnt. What are you talking about? Burnt is the best. I can't stand it when it's undercooked. Maybe that's where. And to burn something is good. It's not something negative. So first of all, there's the praise of the cooking, and with the cooking comes the housekeeping, and you have to praise it all the time. Why?
That's right.
Right. Well, that we talked about. That's Gullus. Gullus is that we have to keep doing it again and again. But again, the praise here is to give the person, to water the person, to give them the ability to continue. They need it in order to continue. So by the way, sometimes a man also needs to hear praise about his cooking and his housework, right? What are we talking about? His work. Sometimes he needs to hear. Men don't do it for that. But once in a while when they're down and they don't feel that they're getting anywhere, and so there's appreciation and praise for the fact that you get up every day and that you do things. But you can't stop there. You can't stop with the physical. Even though, again, in the Torah, these are 3 requirements of giving your wife something physical. But they also have something spiritual hiding behind them. And because we're not just talking about praise in the sense of developing one's physical abilities, and again, the praise is full of loving kindness to feed the person, to make them be able to do it better. So the same thing, it has to have a spiritual dimension to it. So what are we praising that relates to food and cooking, to housework? So what would that be? So there's many, many stories in the Talmud about cooking and food and tzedakah. Actually, we almost read one yesterday, whoever watched the class, but in the end there wasn't enough time to get into it. But there's a famous story. We're almost out of time now? Wow. Okay. So there's a famous story, to tell the story, from Nachum Ish Gamzu, when he was an older man, and he lived he was in his bed, he was incapacitated, he was in a bed, in a house that was about to fall apart. The roof was about to cave in. So when his students came to him and said to him, we want to take you out to a different house, he said, first remove everything that's in the house, and only at the end take my bed out. Why? They said. Because the reason the roof isn't falling in yet is because I'm there. The moment that you take me out, then it'll fall. So first remove everything else, and then there can be another reason deeper, and I don't want to get into it right now. But the Gemara describes what he looked like. He didn't have hands or feet. They had been, I guess, removed because of whatever he had, and his entire body was covered with sores. And they asked him, how did you come to this? It's like, I guess they took some young men from the yeshiva or whatever, and they came to do the chesed, and this is what this old man looks like. So they said, how could Hashem have done this to you? Because they knew he was a great scholar. He saved the Jewish people a number of times even. So he said, it's all my fault. I brought myself to this. Why? So he tells the story. He says, one time I saw a poor man, and he asked me for something to eat. And I was in the process of getting off. He had a load, he was carrying something, and I wanted to give him money, and he would go buy with it something. By the time he finished all his stuff, the man died from starvation. I guess he died from giving up on life, because he didn't know what's going to happen. And then he said Nachum, the hands that slowly took off the load, they should be cut off. And the feet that didn't run to carry you or whatever, they should be. And I think he says, even the thought that I had that I would give you money and you would go, I should be covered with boils. And then that's how he punished himself, as it were. He said, it's a strange story. He said this about himself, and then everything happened. He said, it's not a punishment from God. I caused this to myself. He asked for it. So for him, for a tzaddik like him, that's what he feels, that he was the cause of another person dying. So for him, it was unbearable.
Why would he want anything else out of his house but him? Why did he care about? Why didn't they just take him and not worry about all these other things? That's a different story.
So I said that goes with a deeper insight into his psyche. Right. So there's other stories like with Hanina ben Dosa and others also that would never happen by a woman. Why? Why would it never happen by a woman? Because if somebody comes to the house and asks for something to eat, she always has something to give him. She doesn't give him money and says, go buy. Here, sit down and eat. And so she right away gives him life. So we see that there's an intrinsic connection between food, between the housekeeping, the food, preparation of food, and tzedakah, generosity. That the first form of generosity is always to give food. That's why, by the way, when you go to somebody like the Baba Sali, somebody who was big into this, who understood this in a deep way, when you came in, the first thing that you got was sit down and eat. Before you even tell me what your problems are. Reb Usher was like that. There's a lot of tzaddikim, especially after they read all these stories in the Gemara, that they understood that generosity means, right, you went to give people food. But food, not money. As the thing, if you come to me, first of all, I give you something to eat. First of all, l'achiyot et nafshecha, to give you back your soul. It's interesting that the moment that you feel, that's why I keep telling you that you need support, you don't need supervision. Meaning, because the main thing is that if somebody comes to you, you give them something to eat. That's what gives the soul back. That's what brings the person back to their senses, makes them feel that they have a place in the world. When somebody cares for them, and when you give money, it's almost backhanded. Almost. It's not exactly, but it's close to it. It's almost like saying, well, I don't really care for you, and here's a quick way for me to get rid of you.
It's the mishloach manot.
Right. The difference between mishloach manot and matanot hashanim.
I think
That if a
for bringing also.
For instance, when you invite people into your home, the fact that there's food here and everything, that's a sign that, first of all, I really care for you. So that has to be praised. And where does it come? All the acts of generosity. And we said that really in the end, when a husband praises his wife for her acts of generosity, that's what gives her the strength to have guests. Meaning this is not taken for granted that, what do you mean, we have to have guests. Look at what you did. Look at how good they felt. Look at it. That is the praise. And you created it.
It also helps when he helps you, when he does it with you.
That's also, like my wife said this morning, we were talking about saying, I'm sorry. So I said, sometimes don't say you're sorry, just clean the kitchen.
Right.
And that's what I wrote to her, like in our WhatsApp. So she said, yeah, of course, because that's where the Shechina is. The Shechina is in the kitchen. So if you go and clean the kitchen, the Shechina is very happy, and it's much better than saying you're sorry.
Shlomo Katz said Israel is the kitchen, or Jerusalem is the kitchen.
Said the Beit HaMikdash was one big
He
kitchen.
must have been quoting Carlebach.
Yeah, he was quoting Shlomo who said that Jerusalem is the kitchen and that the Holy of Holies is the building.
We came to Israel to make Aliyah and buy an apartment for 5 days. Went to the yeshiva, they gave us eggs and cucumbers.
Right,
Tomatoes and white cheese. I will never forget that meal.
It makes a big impression.
But by the way,
It goes to the gut.
why the first form of consoling somebody who is in mourning is to give them food. They're not allowed to eat the first meal from their own food. It doesn't matter the eggs, not the eggs, it's secondary. The most important thing, though, is that you don't prepare it from their food in their kitchen. That you bring it from where you are, from you. Because that's the first thing that a person feels. Somebody cares for me. The world didn't come to an end. And it gives you back your soul. So the same thing is with praising one's spouse about what she does in that respect, and it allows generosity. In other words, you can't give tzedakah if your wife doesn't want you to give tzedakah. You can go behind her back, but not really.
What about when the man does it again and the wife wants to give it? Are you allowed to go behind his back?
She can't. No, Chaz v'shalom. It's his money. That's one of the things. My wife always tells me that. She has a story about a woman who ruined her marriage with something like that.
She would give it back out.
And her husband said no. So that's an example of when the wife has to praise the husband to increase in him this willingness to give. By the way, we talked about Navi said that it brought her down. Now to think about this woman who was I can't mention your name. Somebody said that they didn't connect to the story that I said last week about a woman who made her husband into something. That's what it means to care for somebody. That's what it really means.
What means to care?
To praise them and to build them up.
What you did is extraordinary.
Can, but you said that's like not what I feel like my duty is, or my place.
Not so much personal to me. As
So
much
say better than I did.
No, I got. She's extraordinary. I just would like to hear that marriage is happier.
She made her. That's what I said. She made her marriage into a paradise, because she praised the right way, the right amount that was needed, and probably also gave criticism the right amount. But that's what makes the house a paradise, simply paradise. So this is just the first level, the one that relates to duty towards food, to providing food.
Can we say admiration comes under this? You're not just singling out praise.
Right. It's
Praise,
admiration. Same thing. It's admiring the good in my spouse. And again, all the laws that we talked about, laws like the advice about not aggrandizing somebody's ego, just are not relevant.
Is this related to?
Because you really want him to grow. Because you're doing it out of loving kindness. So there's no. I'm not.
This food is real food. It's not a a metaphor.
Either it's food or it's acts of generosity.
It's
so
not
then
money. It's food or acts like that.
It could be giving tzedakah. It's fine. Giving tzedakah is also generosity. I'm just saying that it connects to food. The physical form of it, the most physical, the type that you see, you can touch, you can smell, you can taste, is food. Okay. So we have to end now. So we have two more to. We said we're limiting our time.
Anybody want to take 15 minutes?
Okay. So we're going to end the class now, and next week we'll continue with the clothing and with the relations and how they translate into praise.
Anybody need supervision?
How do we do this? How do we watch this? I tried to find it on your.
It's on his Facebook.